Hello, and welcome to my talk about my Bike for Butterflies, 1,200 miles from Land's End to John O'Groats to raise money for butterfly conservation. My name is Simon Saville, and I'm a volunteer with Butterfly Conservation. I chair the Surrey and South West London branch. I'm also active in London in many other ways to do with the environment and so on. This is a picture of me at Land's End, just about to start with my flag and my bike. And here, this is how I planned the route. So I used the Sustrans and National Cycle Network as the basis of the route. They've got a nice little booklet which sets it out. And I modified that so it went through as many wildlife sites as possible, nature reserves and so on. And my kids gave me this map in the middle after I'd finished with the 1,200 miles in 30 days mapped out with the overnight stops. Also took along my I Spy book, freshly bought for the occasion, and ticked off all the butterflies and moths that I saw as I went along the route. I bought a new bike for the ride because my old bike wasn't quite up to the job. I bought it from a place near Oxford called Oxford Bike Works. And it was the most important thing about a bike like this is that it's the right size and shape for you. So I had a special fitting for that. And it's made for touring with very low gears and some high gears. I named the bike Ollie after an oleander hawk moth I caught when I was moth trapping in Swanage in Dorset. The oleander hawk moth is a very rare visitor to this country. Only about a dozen are seen each year. So I was very pleased in 2018 to have seen an oleander hawk moth. It's one of my big ticks. On day one, started off from Land's End, and you can see in the top of each slide I put the day number, the kilometers cycled, and the amount of climbing I did. So my normal training runs were about 35 kilometers and about 300 meters climb. So this was quite a shock to the system to do this on day one. Upton Towans is a Cornwall Wildlife Trust nature reserve on the north coast of Cornwall by St Ives Bay. And it's what I call a post-industrial landscape. So it used to be a manufacturing site for explosives. The explosives were used in the mining industry nearby. And this led to a lot of small indentations in the land where they did test explosions and so on. Great habitat for all sorts of butterflies and other insects. It's one of the best sites around for silver-studded blues, which are out in June in almost peak numbers. And you can see a mating pair here on the right. And you can just see the silver studs showing on the undersides there, which gives them their name. So that's a wonderful way to start the ride with a visit to such a lovely nature reserve and to see so many lovely butterflies. But as I cycled through the lanes, I kept on seeing wonderful floral road verges, hedgerows like this, full of daisies, but very few butterflies in them. And I was left wondering why that was the case. And I think my conclusion was that this is farming area, lots of crops being grown, lots of pesticides being sprayed and insecticides. I suspect there's some drift onto the verges, which is meaning there aren't any butterflies flying. So the wildlife, the insects and so on are being confined more and more to the reserves and not in the wider countryside, which is a big concern throughout the whole of the UK, really. Then on day 3, I went on to St Breward in Bodmin Moor, quite a steep climb up along the camel trail, which is a lovely cycle route. And we were looking for marsh fritillaries, and we saw a couple. You can see how wet it was underfoot here. So I was wearing wellies to stop getting completely drenched. But Butterfly Conservation had a project called All the Moor Butterflies in the moors down in Cornwall and Devon, and it was specifically for the marsh fritillary and a few other butterflies. Here you can see the fritillary on the right and the eggs laid on the underside of the leaf on the left. And if you've got eagle eyes, you can see shading on the upper side of the leaf here, which is one of the better ways to find eggs without turning over every leaf that you look at. Then I went on the Tarka trail up towards Barnstaple, and this is over the River Torridge. Some really beautiful scenery, and you can see I had some nice weather at this time. But cycling in Cornwall and Devon was quite a challenge. It's very steep hills, lots of river valleys to cross, up and down, up and down. And for some reason, although I was traveling northeast, should have had a following wind. I had headwinds for a lot of the way. Really hard work to cycle against such headwinds. This is me now at the top of Exmoor. I'll play a short video here. But as you'll see, I nearly didn't make this. Wow, that was so tough. Hour and a half of continuous, relentless climbing on unforgiving hills to get to the top of Exmoor. Well, I'm here now, but nature needs our help, so we've got to push on. So that's the highest point of the ride, surprisingly enough, 482 meters, nearly 1,600 feet above sea level, the top of Exmoor, which once you get there is relatively flat. But I was rewarded by skylark singing, so it kind of seemed worth the trip to get all the way up there. Then on the other side of Exmoor, just over into Somerset, Butterfly Conservation Reserve called Haddon Moor, which is the place to see the small pearl-bordered fritillary, which I managed to spot there. Picture of the reserve here. Really, you can see some trees and scrub growing over, so it needs some maintenance, which probably wasn't possible during the COVID time. And this is a small pearl-bordered fritillary. And I was once taught that you can just see 730 as the numbers there on the edge of the wing, which is one of the ways to spot a small pearl-bordered fritillary butterfly. Then after Glastonbury, I'm on day 7 now. I went up to the top of the Mendips to Westbury Beacon with another BC reserve. Really, really steep climb up to the top here, straight out of Glastonbury and up the hill. And there should have been beautiful views from the Mendips, but unfortunately this is where the rain set in. I couldn't see anything. And I think we saw one meadow brown on this reserve, and I was being shown around by one of the local volunteers. There are reserves all along this edge of the Mendips because it's really good habitat for butterflies, and a lot of work is being done there to protect the landscapes. I then went into Bristol and wanted to see some urban transects, and this one was set up by Maggie Moss, who I'll talk about on the next slide. But there's Narroways Millennium Green transect in Bristol, not quite in the heart of the city, but just to the north. And you can see some lovely wildflower meadows, which got ringlets and marbled whites and so on there. So, good butterfly habitat, good insect habitat can be created in urban settings without much difficulty. And this is Maggie herself. Sadly, Maggie died earlier in 2021, so I wasn't able to meet her. But if you want to watch the short 3 or 4 minute video on YouTube, you can do there. That's the address I've given it. And another example of the sort of habitat you've got in this transect. After Bristol, it was on to north of Stroud to the Gloucestershire area to visit the Rough Bank Reserve, and the Gloucestershire branch of Butterfly Conservation pulled out all the stops, and they had an open day at the reserve while I was there. And lots of the volunteers, they ran some moth traps, and you can see 2 of the moths from the trap there on the right hand side. Some lovely specimens. And this chap here standing next to me, he was, I think, 80 years old, keen cyclist, and he used to do a lot more cycling than I was doing, so I was impressed by him. And as I cycled up through the country, people would meet me like this, show me around. People would make donations. People were ever so generous with their time and expertise and everything. And yeah, it was great. This is Rough Bank, and you can see it's a really steep chalk slope. So it's really hard walking if you go down the slope. Very good for chalkland species of butterfly. And on the facing bank of the valley, you can see there was massive ash dieback. So this is going to be a landscape transformed over the next few years as those ash trees finally fall and something comes up in their space, in their place later. Then I was on to the West Midlands, and this was the BC Reserve at Monkwood, which is an ancient woodland, which they manage very effectively. And it's got all sorts of woodland species like White Admiral, Purple Hairstreak, Silverwash Artillery, wood whites here. And just show this picture of 2 courting wood whites that we saw. And you can see them flapping alternately. And although it's only taken on my phone, but their antennae would have been touching as well as they do their courting ritual. This was an unsuccessful attempt by the male, I think, but it was lovely to see the wood whites there. And here's the purple hairstreak we saw, probably one of the first ones of the season because it was only late June, just emerged, and it sat there for a good half an hour, and lots of people were able to get a sighting of it. And the Mike Williams, who was one of the stalwarts of the West Midlands branch, was my ride buddy from Monkwood to the place where I was staying, where people put me up for the night very kindly. And I had a number of ride buddies during the tour, and it was really great to have some company and extra people to chiver me along as I was getting tired. The next day we went into the Wyre Forest, which is a huge national nature reserve, and much of it a triple SI. And this was quite a tough day. You can see there it's 93 kilometers of cycling and 1,000 meters of climbing. Mike Southall was kind enough to put me up the night before. He's the chair of West Midlands. And here we are looking for, we found small pearl bordered fritillaries in the wood, and silverwash artilleries and so on as well. But it wasn't particularly great weather during the time. We did put out some pheromone lures for clearwing moths and caught a few of those, which was fun. Pretty hilly in this woodland, and that was not helpful to me as I got on to my destination, which was in Wem, Shropshire. And I set off from the woods, I think about just gone 1. I didn't arrive in Wem until 7:30. And as you'll see from this video, I was pretty tired by this point.
That was tough. Beautiful morning in Wyre Forest, walking, and a long, hard ride, very hillier than I've had before. It's 7:30, I've just arrived at my destination. I'm utterly exhausted. Whew.
So I never doubted I'd get to the end of the ride, the full 1,200 miles, but I did doubt sometimes whether they get to the end of the day. And that was one of the days where I was really glad to see the destination. The next day was a much shorter day, thankfully. And we went on to Heath Common, which was a reserve bought by Butterfly Conservation about 15 years ago. And it's been transformed. A lot of work had to be put in there to restore it back to a heathland, because it had been used for agriculture after the war, or during the war and since then. But a lot of work, that work has paid off, and I've got lots of heather there, and the silver-studded blues are doing really well. The same butterfly I saw on day 1 was here in really good numbers, despite the poor weather. Callum McGregor was my ride buddy for the day. It's really good to have him along. He's from the Yorkshire branch of Butterfly Conservation, but now living in North Wales. So that was a great day. And the reserve warden, Stephen Lewis, rewarded me with sending me songs to cheer me up as I went further north, like Raindrops Keep Falling on Your Head, which was very apposite at one point. And here we've got some silver-studded blues. This is a freshly emerged female, I think, being tended by ants, and that was lovely to see the ecology working. And this was just an example taken on the phone of numbers flying, attempting to females just emerged, being swamped by males. So it was a really uplifting day to see these butterflies in such good form at that reserve. Then things started to go bad, and it had to be near Manchester, didn't it? Everything seemed to happen in Manchester. So on one of the cycle routes, the National Cycle Network routes, this very unhelpful gate was called an accessible gate. And I think it works for wheelchairs, but it certainly doesn't work for a bicycle with a pannier. And having to find a way to kind of get my bike through there was a real trial. And earlier in the day, I'd been looking for white-letter hairstreaks on elms in Northwich, but it was absolutely pouring down. And you can see the elms. This one's got some Dutch elm disease. I found the site that I needed, where the white-letter hairstreaks are present. but I was just standing under the tree as the rain poured down and down and down. And also at this, just after this, my sat nav, what I was using for navigation, got waterlogged and died. So I had to go into the shop the next day and try and find another one. I'll go back. I said, have you got a sat nav to replace this one that was broken? They said, yeah, we've got one. It's £320. I said, have you got anything else? Because that seemed a bit expensive. So they had a phone holder for £20. So I bought that. But it was the waterproof cover for it was relatively light and thin, and the rain was raining so hard that the raindrops would land on the cover and turn the phone off, and then I would have no sat nav again. So it wasn't the best purchase in the world. I was then due later that day when I bought after the rain to meet up with Jane Jones from Lancashire branch of Butterfly Conservation at a park called Phillips Park in Manchester. So with my slightly deficient navigation system, I set off and got to Phillips Park, called Jane. She said, I'm in Phillips Park. And it turned out that I was in the wrong Phillips Park, and then the right one was 10 miles away. So we cancelled that plan and I cycled directly on to Accrington, which is quite a long way further north. And visited this Milnshaw Park Wildflower Meadow, which is part of the Hindburn Butterfly Project. And these wonderful volunteers, Chris and Gemma from the Lancashire branch, had created this, and they'd done a really good job. They'd got a grant of a couple of £1,000, scraped the topsoil off of the area about the size of a couple of tennis courts, seeded it, and two years later they had 18 species of butterfly there, showing that even in urban settings it's easy to create wildflower meadows and not too expensive to do so either. That was a real booster on that day. Jane was kind enough to put me up for the night that night. And the next day we went on to the Coronation Meadow in Belsykes Farm in the Forest of Bowland near Sladeburn. It's kind of halfway up the hill. The Forest of Bowland is a huge hilly area north of Manchester. And I hadn't heard of Coronation Meadows before, but the lady from the AONB showed me around. And these were established in 2012 at the Queen's Jubilee, 60th Jubilee it would have been. And they're the best examples of wildflower meadows in each county. So there's one per county. And the idea is that the Coronation Meadow has offspring. And from the seeds collected in that meadow, it's used to feed, to create other meadows in the county elsewhere. So this was the Coronation Meadow for Lancashire. And there's some original meadows and some have been created new. And I think this one Coronation Meadow has now spawned 80 plus like children from itself. So this was a great day. Pity the weather was so bad, but the weather got better as I got up to the top of the hill. There's a place called the Cross of Greet, which is another 400-meter hill. And you can see the road comes all the way up the side of the hill here, from way back down there somewhere. But after the top, it was downhill pretty much all the way, which was fantastic because I was getting pretty tired by the stage of the ride. The next day, went on to the Morecambe Bay area in Silverdale, and there are a number of very good wildlife sites there. Butterfly Conservation got its own fairly small reserve called Myers Allotment, and that's been managed really well, and it's got a very strong community around it. And I was fortunate, this was the 10th anniversary celebrations on the day I was passing through. So they had all sorts of awards and cakes and so on, and a walk around the reserve. And it was lovely to see that working at its peak. But one of the target species for the reserve is the high brown fritillary, but unfortunately it's either not present or in very low numbers now. It's had to go across to another site, a few miles away, called Holme Stinted Pastures, and there on the right hand side is the high brown fritillary that was caught to prove its presence and then released soon afterwards. Lovely butterfly, hard to distinguish between that and the dark green fritillary, and the experts were able to do it while the butterflies are flying, but I certainly couldn't. But the issue for this butterfly is the lack of habitat. You see on the left the picture there of the bracken, and underneath the bracken growth is rich grass growing, and that's a problem. That happens when the soil becomes too fertile, and then the grass grows instead of it becoming relatively bare earth with lots of dry bracken leaf litter there, because the caterpillars from this butterfly, when in the spring, like to bask on the leaf litter, which is a microclimate very much warmer than the surrounding area. But it's thought that deposition of fertilizer, nitrogen fertilizer from Northern Ireland is coming over and making this soil too fertile, and then it's getting a problem for the butterfly to have the right habitat. So it's really struggling and hard to create the right habitat for it when the soil there's so much nitrogen deposition. I then took a morning off the next day, and Chris Winnick, who's the chair of the Cumbria branch, was kind enough to show me around Whitbarrow, which is a limestone outcrop just near Kendal. And we went to 4 sites around Whitbarrow, and we saw, this one is in White Scar, where we saw the northern brown argus, grayling, small pearl-bordered fritillary, and other things there. It was lovely sites. And problem possibly coming for the northern brown argus is it's now flying in the same territories as it's gone spreading south, and the brown argus is spreading north. There's a risk that these two might interbreed, and the northern brown argus may be affected by its more prevalent cousin, as it were. Chris had suggested to me that I should pop into the Sainsbury's car park in Kendal, because there's some elms at the back of it, and you can see the elms here, characteristic elm trees, and there would be white-letter hairstreaks there. So I eventually found the elms, stood around for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and eventually saw the white-letter hairstreaks flying at the top of the elms. That was the only time on the whole trip that I was managed to track down some white-letter hairstreaks, but I was pleased to have done so. And thanks to Chris for telling me about that. I then decided to go up the A6 to Shap Fell. Most of the traffic now goes on the M6, so this actually was quite a quiet route, no heavy duty vehicles, and you can see the route there back through the valley. And it was a lovely ride, and lovely views from the top, and lovely valleys. And again, another 400-meter peak. On to Carlisle. So you do see some funny signs as you go past things on the road. So cat's eyes removed. But there was a lovely wildflower verge as I went into Carlisle, and it had lots of thistles, creeping thistle there, and that was full of tortoiseshell butterflies like this one, small tortoiseshells, and meadow browns and ringlets and things, and really nice to see that. But no peacocks. I didn't see any peacocks on the ride at all. I think it was just too early for the summer brood and too late for the overwintering ones. Then leaving England and on into Scotland, and here we are at Shaddle Park in Hamilton, just south of Glasgow. And I found this one of the most dismal sights of the ride, really. Huge expanse of grassland just mown to within an inch of its life. I thought how wonderful that would be if it were a wildflower meadow, or at least in part a wildflower meadow. It's got some historical significance as a view, but I thought it would be lovely to have that as a wildflower meadow, and I could think of the butterflies thriving on it. But there's plenty more we could do to create wildlife habitat if we wanted to. Then into Glasgow. This was the day after England played Italy in the Euro 2020 final. And I probably had one too many beers, as I was thinking England might actually win that game. So this was a pretty sluggish day, I must say. But I was looking at areas which have been created in the Helping Hands project in Scotland. And this is where we get local volunteers to create wildflower meadows in urban settings. 2 parks here in Glasgow, different character. The one on the left is a lovely south-facing bank and quite florally rich. And there are quite a few butterflies there despite the weather. Fewer in the one on the right, but it's less well developed. But it shows once again that wildflower meadows can be created all over the country north, south, and urban and rural. This is, as I went north, I saw lots and lots of ringlet butterflies, and people kept on telling me, both in Cumbria and in Scotland, that they didn't used to see ringlets. And this is, I think, a climate change winner in the sense that it's moving north. And in sort of June, July, it's one of the commonest butterflies you see in the countryside in Scotland. And you can see its distribution has massively changed since the 70s, 80s to more recently. And it's even seen further north than this now. And everywhere, that's the cairngorms in the middle, but everywhere else there, you can see the ringlet is present. Then on to Stirling, went along the wonderful Forth and Clyde Canal between Glasgow and Stirling to a reserve called Westermoss. And this is a raised bog reserve, and it should be very damp, and it should be full of cotton grass, which is a larval food plant for large heath butterfly. Despite lots of volunteer and paid work by a group called the Bog Squad, it's drying out. I think that's due to the underlying geology, and scrub is encroaching, so it's really struggled to maintain this type of habitat. It's surrounded by hazel and birch trees and so on. We didn't see any large heath butterflies. In fact, I only saw one solitary large heath down in Cumbria, in fact. But nearby the reserve is a place called Falin Bing. Falin is an old mining town, and a Bing, which I didn't know, is essentially an artificial hill, a coal hill, essentially a coal spoil heap, and it's not very high, 50 feet, 100 feet, something like that, but wonderful views. And you can see here the view over Westermoss and how it's surrounded by scrubby trees. How these trees are starting to encroach, and the view towards Stirling with the magnificent castle on the hill there. But as you turn your eyes down, you see wonderful florally rich areas. This is because the Bing itself is a very infertile substrate, and the characteristic for the best wildflower meadows is that they're on infertile soils. So this was really lovely to see, and it was, I said, florally rich. You can see there's just bitterwood truffle everywhere, common blues and so on, and a six-pot burnet moth and antler moth, which is a new one for me, and some companions, as I've called them there, on ragwort. So yeah, it was wonderful to visit the Bing. I'm getting north into the Highlands of Scotland now, in a place called Callander, and beautiful riverside area there. And I was lucky to get an ice cream. This was the last ice cream before the machine broke, but sometimes you just need an ice cream after you've been cycling on a warm day. And these are some of the wildflower meadows in Callander. This one here down by the riverside, there weren't many butterflies in it, but it was very, very nice to see. And then on the other, just turning around to face the other way, practically, you could see where they mow the grass and where they don't, and how much better it was on the right hand side than on the left. Once again, more can be done without much effort, I think. Then I went looking for the mountain ringlet, which is our only mountain butterflies. I'll show you on the next slide. Only seen at altitudes of above 350 meters in Scotland and a bit higher than that in England, and it's quite limited. The cycle from Killin, where I was staying the night before, to Ben Law's car park was a fairly brutal one, because you start at about 50 meters, end up at 400 plus meters. So you're climbing up quite a lot in a very short period of time. So I was pretty tired when we got to the top. And then this is the view from the car park up to the reserve. There's another 200 meters climbing to get to the top of the reserve. And it's very noticeable that the reserve is wooded, but the area around it isn't. And that's because there's an exclosure. A fence around the reserve keeps the deer out. So this is the effect of deer on the general countryside. And this is what happens when you don't have the deer there. So it's a very marked difference, and shows what effect the deer have on habitat in the Highlands. So now we have the mountain ringlet, whereas the ringlet butterfly was a climate change winner. This one may well be a loser, because it's a montane species and only found on relatively high mountains in Britain. And its range is declining as it's having to go higher up to maintain the conditions it likes. And if we continue to have warming, then does it have anywhere to go? So a big concern for that species. And if that's the case, there's not much we can do, I'm afraid. These are the views from Ben Lawes National Nature Reserve down to the Loch Tay. Absolutely stunning views. It was a lovely day. And then some cotton grass here. There are large heaths in this reserve, but I didn't see any. The challenge in spotting mountain ringlets on this reserve is it's absolutely full of ringlets, not mountain ringlets, and they fly together. So you have to be pretty sure which one you're spotting. Then on the way to Pitlochry, I couldn't resist this sign, a town called Dull paired with boring. And it was the countryside and the scenery was anything but dull as you cycle up here. I was fortunate to have good weather at this point. This is the River Tay at Kenmore, and absolutely stunning and lovely to see. On that same day, as I was having the beautiful weather, that is when the catastrophic floods were happening in Europe, with so many fatalities. And I was shocked to see these pictures on the newspaper. This is just a snap from the newsstand. A little bit later, southern England was having a heat wave, and I was having temperatures of about 14 degrees. So the tables were turned later on. But climate change was never far from my mind as I was going north. Then further on up, this is the Pass of Dromocta, which is the highest point on the National Cycle Network in Scotland. Still not the highest point of the whole ride. That was back in Exmoor. But the hills here, unlike those in Cornwall and Devon, the hills are big, but the inclines are generally relatively gentle, and it's easier cycling than in Cornwall and Devon, where you've got very steep but maybe shorter hills, which actually are more tiring. And as I was going here, again, suffered awful headwinds. Then went on to Inch Marshes by the River Spey, and this is Strathspey. Lovely RSPB site, a very important habitat. Again, wildflower meadows have been created there. I was due to stay with Tom Prescott in the Scotland branch, but unfortunately he was isolating because he'd been in contact with someone with COVID. So Pete Moore kindly put me up, and he lived further afield, and drove me back to this place so I could start without losing any of my cycling the whole route. Then I was on my way to Inverness, and the lovely Packhorse Bridge in Carbridge. I was surprised to see it standing, and I was really, it doesn't look like a bridge I'd want to take a packhorse across, frankly, but I suppose that was what was done. And this is my last hill above 400 meters on the ride. Again, relatively gentle to get up there, but still quite a high climb. You could see this was a long day. And as I was coming into Inverness, I got to Clarver Cairns, which is a Neolithic site just south of Edinburgh, Inverness, I'm sorry, near Culloden. And I got a call from the lady who was my ride buddy for the next day, Mary. She said, "Simon, that hotel you said you're staying at, you can't stay there." She said, "It's not a good hotel at all. It's a hostel. It's full of druggies, and it's rife with COVID at present. You must come and stay with me. I'll come and ride with you from Culloden. My husband will bring me there, and we'll put you up for the night," which is really, really kind of her. Save my bacon, really. But she lived north of Inverness, so it made a very long day. Longest day I had, in fact. Tested me sorely. And going across Keswick Bridge, because she lived on the north side of Inverness, was a bit hair-raising because it was blowing a gale, and you are quite a long way above the Firth here, above the water, and every time you went past a pillar, you'd be buffeted by the wind. So I didn't enjoy this much at all. But then the next day, we went along the Black Isle, and over to and about the Cromarty Firth, and we went on this little ferry to Nig Dunes on the north side. And you think that car is driving onto the ferry? No, it's driving off the ferry. The ferry only has room for 2 cars, and you drive on frontwards and reverse off backwards. And this car nearly reversed over the slope onto the sand. So it was a bit hair raising for it. But in the dunes, we did some butterfly looking, found quite a few species, and it was my one and only small copper for the trip was seen here, which was very pleasing to catch that one. Then Mary and I cycled on further up to Leg, but on the way we stopped at Ardguy and looking for Scotch Argus, which is a really common butterfly in most of Scotland in the summer, but we were just about a week too early. That some had been seen, I think, earlier the day when I was there, but sadly we didn't see any, even though the habitat was good in this lovely community wood in Ardguy. And then on to Leg, which is the last big town as you go. Well, it's not even a very big town. Last town before you go north. And then it was from north of Leg is the flow country, the Blanket Bog, which covers most of the northeast of Scotland. And there's an isolated pub there called the Crask Inn, which is alleged to be the most isolated pub in Britain. Certainly is in the middle of nowhere. And this is nothing but moorland. You look forwards and backwards. This is all you see. This is not where you want to break down or have something badly go wrong with the bicycle or fall ill or whatever, because there's not much, and there's not much mobile signal either. Now it's going north from Altnahara. Here's the Crask Inn. Here's Altnahara. Here's the north coast of Scotland, and I'm going up this valley here, which is the Strathneva, along with the Loch Neva, north of Altnahara. This is Loch Neva here, and really beautiful area. And I stayed in Weehoose Glamping at this point, which had 3 pods. It wasn't the highest glamping quality in the world, but it was certainly very comfortable and very quiet, relaxed place to be. And the view from the camp at the top there was stunning. With these are Munro's hills over 1,000 feet, yeah, it was a lovely place. And this was one of the most notorious areas for the highland clearances in the last century. Sorry, before that, 1850s, 1860s, and a lot of talks and walks around about that. And then on the north coast of Scotland, I found another coronation meadow. This is called the Burn of Midsand. It's at Dunnet Beach. Unfortunately, it was very poor weather. It was 14 degrees, so nothing was flying at all. But you could see this would be a florally rich meadow, and it would have had quite a few butterflies and bees and things in it if the weather had been better. But I was pleased to pick up a couple of coronation meadows as I went along. And then I made the journey to the most northerly point of the mainland of Britain. This is Dunnet Head, where the RSPB have got a reserve. Again, you could see how poor the weather was. So it's not a great view. Quite a trek up to this from the coastal road, but nonetheless a tick in the box really to achieve that. Then finally, here we are at John O'Groats. You can see me there standing by the sign. I'm holding the Butterflies of Cornwall Atlas, which I was given by the volunteers from the Cornwall branch of Butterfly Conservation. They published it on the Saturday after my visit to St Breward in Bodmin Moor, and they gave me a copy, and I said I would cycle with it to John O'Groats, and then we would auction it for charity. And next time we have a charity auction with Butterfly Conservation. And yeah, there were three cyclists there, I think, when I was there at John O'Groats on this day. This is the numbers for the ride. You can see me, that's with my flag. 1,200 miles, 19 kilometers of ascent, 40 plus wildlife sites, 34 species of butterfly. I was a bit disappointed with that number of species. I thought I might see well over 40, but I had problems with rain in the Glastonbury area where I thought I might pick up some more species. And I was kind of between broods for some of the species as well, and then had poor weather further north. I visited 7 of Butterfly Conservation Reserve. 7 people put me up for the night. Other times I was staying in B&Bs, 6 ride buddies, 2 very tired legs, but remarkably no punches in the whole ride. And sadly, no peacocks either. Some lessons, what did I learn on the ride? Well, first one was don't be afraid to ask for help and take it when it's offered. The second was to have faith in yourself. I didn't know, I'd never done a ride like this. I didn't know I could do it. So I had to believe in myself and just knuckle down and get it done. The third one was, yes, do all the planning, but you have to go with the flow. And Stephen Lewis from the Heath Common Warden, one of the things he sent me was let it be, just, you know, whatever's going to be is going to be. Enjoy the journey. Don't worry about the destination. And there's never any shame in using the lower gear, but there is always a headwind. And here you can see, this is what the road in the flow country looks like. Not much there. Next time I'd carry less stuff. I'd send 2 packages home. So I was carrying far too much stuff. I didn't take any rest days, even though some of the days are relatively short, but I would take more rest days. I'd train more, particularly for hills, for a laden bike and for longer rides. I'd spend more time in the green spaces. I tended to get to the hotels earlier rather than later. And although I took well over 1,000 photos, I think I'd take more if I was to do it again. But I'm not going to do that again. I might do something different this year. And the idea is maybe to go from Inverness to Carlisle. Go down there. There's a cycle route called the Caledonia Way, which goes Inverness, Oban, Campbelltown. The home of the checkered skipper, very rare butterfly in Britain, is around Oban. Find that there. Hop over to Mull and Col and Tyree, where they've got the maca habitat, which is a very specific habitat of wildflowers on a sort of sandy substrate. Get the ferry to near Ayr and cycle down through, maybe take on some sites down here. So that's the kind of thoughts for this summer, yet to be finalized. And finally, I've got so many people I wanted to thank, and you can see them here. Volunteers, people who put me up, everybody who donated, hundreds of people donated, people who rode with me, people cheering me along physically or on social media. The team at head office were fantastic. Sustran created the National Cycle Network, which was a godsend to this, and Richard at Oxford Bike Works created a wonderful bike for me to ride. All thanks to them. And finally, we raised over £30,000. Donations still trickling in. And if you want to get in touch with me, you've got my details there. But my motto was nature needs our help and never more than now, as we did this ride. So thank you very much. And I shall leave it there.